That's that time in the morning when we take a look at some of the stories making the front pages of today's international newspapers. I'm delighted to say that joining me in the studio for a stroll through the headlines is the social entrepreneur and familiar face to our Rise viewers, Claudine Reid. A very good day to you.
Good day to you.
Now, we're going to start our stroll in Nigeria with this day newspaper, the Nigerian Daily, and quite a few stories there. One that we were referring to in our programme earlier about the fracas which occurred in the lower house, but also at the top, President Obama hosting Muhammadu Buhari next month.
Yes, very, very interesting. The leaders on the world stage, who's, the whole of the nation have got their eyes on Obama for, all the obvious reasons, but more interestingly, Muhammadu Buhari taking his first trip to America. And, the two world leaders have a little bit in common in terms of, some of the challenges that they're dealing with in their respective countries with Boko Haram and some of the terrorist acts in the United States. But this is going to be a very, very interesting one in terms of their conversation and what will actually come out of this.
I suppose as well it shows the degree of international goodwill to Nigeria, because it has to be stressed that the election in March was closely watched, not just amongst Nigerians themselves, but by the international community as well.
Yes, and there was, so many stories, splinter stories coming out of the election, when they, first of all, they changed the date of the election, which is sort of quite unprecedented, really. You set an election date and expect it to run according to plan, but they had the change of date, and of course, everything that's going on with Boko Haram and the amount of pressure that's being put on the outgoing president, Goodluck Jonathan, and the incoming Muhammadu Buhari. So I think there'll be lots of interest and discussion, but more importantly, let's look at how we can, or how the two heads of state can work towards bringing a close or clamping down on Boko Haram.
Yeah, that's right, because certainly during the campaign itself, and this was something a number of people had picked up on with Boko Haram, that it started off as an anti-Western education movement, and then they got very ambitious and bold and started affiliating themselves with IS at a time when IS were on the ascendancy in the Middle East. OK, moving on to another of the stories, an extraordinary story, in fact. This is the Daily Telegraph Australia. Now, we touched on this story a few months back, in fact, but it's the story of a young woman who ran a blog in Australia in which she claimed to be fighting cancer, and it turned out that she had lied. And a television channel in Australia, Channel 9, has been criticised for paying her 45,000 Australian dollars to take part in a flagship programme.
Yeah, this story is really quite one that's really quite distasteful. Pretending of this magnitude with a disease that so many people are suffering from worldwide.
Because she says she had brain cancer.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's transpired that she doesn't have brain cancer. But when you look at the scenario and look at how money-driven this is, could she have not come up with a different story? Could there have not been something more exciting that she could have spoken about, but pretending that she's had this? And I think when you look at some of the actual real-life cancer sufferers who's actually taken solace in her experience, she had a deal that was supported by Apple where they helped her with an app, and she got a book deal and all these things. And when the real cancer sufferers were taking solace in her scenario, in her situation, and actually downloading her app, it's really very, very distasteful, out of tragic circumstances.
Yeah. I suppose the interesting thing will be why she did it, because so far there appears to have been a degree of silence on that point, but I guess that really it's one thing to agree to talk to the press, but the fact that you're being paid for this, given that the backdrop to the story as well.
Well, they are going to go ahead with the interview, so we'll see. It's a full 60 minutes, so we'll see what comes out of that, and hopefully we can get to the bottom of the reason why.
Absolutely, although Channel 9 has actually held off from saying whether they paid her or not. They've been tight-lipped on this question, according to the article. Moving on now to the Wall Street Journal Asia, and the story here: officials must scope of US computer breach.
Yeah, very interesting one here. We've got two major breaches in security, but only one has really been reported. The FBI have reported that they think this is the work of China, although China have strenuously denied that they have nothing to do with this. But it's interesting that they've only reported one element of the breach. It makes you wonder what's going on and if there are further issues that needs to be unsurfaced.
Because what they didn't report, apparently, security clearance forms, according to the current and former US officials, and they've said that these forms contain information that foreign intelligence agencies could use to target espionage operations, which doesn't really tell you a huge amount that's specific, but I guess it gives you a sense of the gist of what this is all about. But either which way, it's very embarrassing for the Americans.
Absolutely, it is indeed. And when we look at, they were saying something like around 18 million unique social security numbers have gone missing. That's not the type of information that you want out in, you know, in the World Wide Web. But it's happened, and there needs to be some clarity to how comes this has happened, and furthermore to ensure that it doesn't reoccur.
Yeah, I guess that with those social security details, again, for people who want to steal identities, these could be important tools in building a false ID. The Wall Street Journal Europe, again, one of the stories which has been dominating the headlines this week and which will do over the weekend. This is the Greek drama, the financial crisis affecting this country, that really it has to be resolved by the weekend. Otherwise, I guess the doomsday scenario will kick in. That's the inference. Yeah,
I mean, this has been going on, like you said, for a while now, and we've got this whole scenario where Greece has to transfer just over 1.5 billion to the IMF within by the 30th of June.
And this was a rolled over debt as well, because they had to pay off a portion of that money earlier in the month. They managed to then sort of roll it over to when the main debt was needed at the end of the month. So
absolutely.
The question is, how will they do it?
Absolutely. And I think one of the interesting things here is that the Slovakian finance minister has a Twitter message saying that this is unprecedented or uncharted waters that we're entering. And I think when we look at the whole Eurozone, and we've never been in such a situation before, I think it looks like it's going to be a precedent that's going to be set for any other European countries that find themselves in such a challenge.
So we could have a Grexit, although who knows, it could work out the other way. Well, let's stay with the Wall Street Journal Europe as well. Now, there are two stories which we found, which in a sense kind of link together in their own way. And this is the story of Airbnb and Uber. But take us through Airbnb, and then we can talk about Uber.
Very, very interesting. Airbnb, you know, I'm not even sure if our viewers know what Airbnb is, but in terms of the whole scenario whereby the chief exec has been utilising the company to avoid paying taxes in terms of setting up a very profitable, very professional business, linking the tourist industry and the housing market where tourists can go online, I guess, and find...
So if you lived in Paris and I wanted somewhere to stay, I didn't want to get to stay in a hotel, I could actually stay in your house if you've put it on Airbnb.
Absolutely, absolutely. But one of the whole sort of interesting things here is that the company is set or valued at £24 billion, and there's now issues around taxes and, of course, uproar in the hotel industry and looking at how we're going to bring the balance, because it's a viable business, clearly it is, but we've got to sort out the tax regulations of this.
But I'm not sure that if I was actually vacating my house for, let's say, a couple of weeks, that I'd be quite happy for someone else to move in. But I mean, having said that, I could be tempted. But then on the other hand, there's this whole controversy surrounding Uber. This is the taxi firm.
Yes.
Against a similar principle in that if there's a taxi knocking around or someone's car, as I understand it, then and they're on the app, I can hail them or arrange for them to bring me to pick me up, take me where I need to go, and they'll cost less than a regular cab.
Absolutely, and this has got the French taxi firms rightly so, up in arms. This is their job, this is their livelihood, this is the work that they've been doing for the last...
So it's the hotels.
Absolutely, for the last 24 years. But it's quite an interesting concept in terms of these new, viable, sustainable businesses that are coming up. And, of course, the big boys are not happy with this, and there's going to be some sort of clamping down, some sort of regulation that's going to happen in order to ensure that they don't take their share of the market. Yeah,
because some French officials have actually been saying, look, let's just ban Uber altogether and just protect the status quo. But then I suppose you have to ask yourself, well, where does the customer fit into all this? Because they need to have a sense of choice. If you don't want to use a regular cab service, there has to be an alternative.
And you've got these organisations springing up, and responding to customer demand is about driving down prices, and of course somebody's going to be affected by this.
OK then. Claudine, we'll leave it there, but thank you so much for taking us through a selection of the newspapers. Quite a few. We've done very well, actually.
We have indeed.
We have. Excellent.